Did I have the slides up sharing?
Oh, great. Thanks, Elise. Will you switch to the next, the quote slide? Perfect. So welcome. We do want to say thank you again for joining us this month for our assessment director meeting. We have some information as well as feedback we'd like to gather from you this month. But and just a quick note that both Darren and Kim are out today. So if you have questions for either of them, please let them know. I will happily try to answer them, but also you can reach out to Darren or Kim as well. But we wanted to start off with thinking about a quote, especially as we're coming up on Thanksgiving, about a week away, and thinking about this quote from G.K. Chesterton of, "When it comes to life, the critical thing is whether you take things for granted or take them with gratitude." So I know one of the things I wanted to publicly share with the assessment department as well as the assessment directors, but my gratitude and thanks for all of you for the great working collaboratives and colleagues that we have. I really appreciate the people at USBE and the work that they do. They are amazing teammates and help support each other. And so I wanted to publicly thank them for the work that everyone in the assessment department does and appreciate the support that they provide to you all. So thank you for that, assessment team. The next slide is a board meeting update. So one of the things that Darren wanted to include was that the ESSA waiver request was recently completed through the board meetings. That one went through. And then on the next slide, some future items for board meetings. One thing we're working on is digital licenses for our Acadience math benchmark, a contract amendment for that. We're looking forward to our benchmark reading assessment contract. We have finished the RFP. There was a protest on that, so we can't announce the vendor yet until we finalize things with the protest on that contract. But hold soon, we'll be able to announce that, I'm positive. But we'll continue on with the contracts that we do have for the remainder of this year. And then there was one other thing coming up in board meetings. It returned to committee meetings in October, and that was the R277925 Effective Teachers in High Poverty Schools. That incentive program, that one's gone back to the committee meeting in November. So that's a quick update on that. As far as our Assessment and Accountability Policy Advisory Committee, our APAC summary, we do have an upcoming meeting on November 30th, a shortened meeting to address some of the things that we didn't have time to get through in the last APAC meeting. A few of those have to do with our language arts assessment. So one of the questions is something that we'll be coming to you for feedback for today in just a couple of slides. But that is to address the blueprint designs for our RISE assessments for grades 3 through 8. Related to assessing speaking and listening. So we'll get into that in a couple of slides, but just know that that's something that we'll be taking your feedback today to the APAC committee on November 30th. Another topic for that APAC meeting will be a recommended replacing the annual LEA assessment plan, instead replacing that with an annual assurance document. So instead of you having to write out your annual assessment plan each year, you'd be signing the assurance document stating, yes, you've prepared and are ready for all of the assessments. Another topic for the APAC summary or APAC agenda, excuse me, is to take a look at our Utah Aspire Plus and determine if the assessment has realized its legislative intent and is meeting the needs for people across the state. And then finally, we're going to be reviewing the 2 proctor requirement and then working with UADs to draft recommended language on bringing that back to our January full board or full APAC meeting, the full meeting. So those are some of the upcoming agenda items. We do have a few vacancies on the Assessment and Accountability Policy Advisory Committee. If you're interested or know anyone that would be interested that would fill any of these needs, we are always looking for, not always, but we currently have several openings for members to be on the APAC committee. So if you know anyone that would be interested, please share this information with them. On the slides, you can find a link to the application, and please spread the word that we're looking for people in each of those positions. Okay, so as I mentioned, one of the discussions we've been having lately is regarding the RISE speaking and listening portion. So Elise, we flip to the next slide. This shows a draft of the blueprints that we've been talking about for upcoming spring of 25 to assess the new ELA standards. One of the things we've noted, and you might note here on the blueprints, they look different from our current RISE blueprints for ELA because we've removed the language category. As we've spoken with teachers and had teachers come in to review all of our items, they really, as the standards have changed, there's no more language standards in the like a reporting category in the ELA standards. Rather, they're woven throughout the ELA standards, particularly in the writing standards through application of writing. We decided the way that is asked to be taught is not something we could assess with those editing task items any longer. So that's not something that we're including on the test. So we've already removed one of the reporting categories that we currently have. What we've left with is reading and speaking and listening, which speaking and listening is really just listening. So because of that, because it's just one category and of the items that we're assessing, to get a full reporting category that has a strong standard error of measure, we would need to assess 8 to 10 items on speaking and listening. Now, our problem with this comes with we can only assess listening, not speaking on our assessment with the way that we are able to assess. So if we are spending 8 to 10, using 8 to 10 items of our operational test out of the 30 to 34-ish items plus the one cluster, it's roughly 20% of the test would come from listening. And it would come from one listening standard, if that grade level even has a listening standard. So we came up with 2 grade levels that really don't even have a listening standard that we could assess. 3rd grade and 6th grade, and we'll show that in just one moment. So we're running into some issues with assessing speaking and listening, and really assessing listening. Because of that, because it's not going to align to more than one standard and only in grades 4, 5, 7, and 8. If we did assess listening, it would be roughly 20% of the items that a student sees. And then it would also be only based off of one standard, not a group of standards. So Elise, will you flip to the next slide? This is the 3rd grade speaking and listening standards. And you can see in 3rd grade, the focus really is more on speaking. So all of these standards where in the past with our ELA standards, there were 2 listening standards mostly that we aligned to. In 3rd grade now, there's not really any. You can see that you're participating in a range of conversations, you're speaking clearly and audibly, you're using appropriate language and grammar when you're responding. So it's really more around speaking, and the focus is on speaking, not necessarily on listening. So we wouldn't have any listening in 3rd grade. 4th grade and 5th grade did have one standard that we could have had, we can align our listening standards or items to. But then we come to 6th grade. So at least we flip to the next slide is 6th grade. 6th grade, you can see there is one standard, that SL2, where it says interpret credible information presented in various formats. So that one, partially we can start to have a listening standard aligned. The concern by the committee was that to make informed decisions, because that part is different than how our items would really align. So there was another concern with actually assessing in 6th grade listening as well. So all of this comes down to a poll. We're leaning towards not including listening on the assessment, and that would make our RISE ELA assessment really just a reading assessment. We would be assessing the reading standards. Because of the issues with not assessing in particularly grade levels in like 3rd grade and 6th grade, not having a listening items that we can align, it would be difficult to have vertical alignment when you don't have comparable reporting categories. So when we have additional items in some grades, but not in other grades that we're aligning to different standards, vertical alignment gets tricky. So our question to you is, should we assess listening on the RISE assessment in the grades that have one standard that it could be aligned to, And you'd have to assess 8 to 10 questions. So roughly 20% of the test would be aligned to listening and one standard. Or should we not assess listening on RISE and only assess those reading, informational, and literature standards? Before we put up the poll, are there any questions or people that want to discuss things? One note as well, we did talk with US Ed, the US Education Department, and asked specifically about what can we test as we're meeting our peer review requirements. They said this was okay. There have been lots of places that have not been testing writing. Many places have not assessed the speaking or listening standards in the past. So although it's different for Utah in our RISE assessed grades, it is something that other states have been doing. And Rachel, I see your question about having more time to think it through. I think that's appropriate too. Our meeting is November 30th. So we can take a poll here today. We've also asked the literacy directors, the secondary literacy directors had their meeting earlier this week. We polled them, and we'll be asking the elementary literacy directors next week on Monday, compiling all this information to take to the APAC committee on November 30th. So if you'll respond to the poll today, but if you reach back out with, after you've thought about things and have other points that you'd like to clarify or ask questions about, or have changed your mind, please feel like you feel free to do that up until the day before the 30th, probably even November 29th, just so we can compile that information for the policy advisors. Any other thoughts before we put up the poll question? One of the things we have thought about is if we, sorry, and I just saw the note from Advantage Arts Academy for some of the students with auditory processing disorders, not being assessed on listening might be appreciated. We do have those grade levels where they do have questions that would align. We would still have those items and they could be available in benchmark form. So it's not like that we wouldn't necessarily lose those items where we can realign them. We could have them available for people to use still. So if people are concerned about if we're not assessing it, then people may not teach it. We still have other options, but really the intent behind the standards was more of some listening, but really through conversation, that students are actively listening and responding, and they're having a clear voice, and they're using the speaking skills as well. Okay, so thank you, Kendra. In the past, the speaking and listening portion has provided information for students that may have struggled with reading, but have skills in listening comprehension. Okay, so I think Jerry, I know we set up a poll question. And I don't know if Emily or Jerry, I don't know if that's moving past. Know how to share the poll.
Elise, can you?
Polls. Oh, here we go.
Elise is doing the slides. Could she share the poll?
Guys listening. Yep, I can share it. I got it right here. Launch. Okay, so the poll questions should be up. Oh, sorry. And Natalie, no, we're not on Nearpod today. It should just be in the Zoom. The poll should just come up through the Zoom. Oh, and thank you, Tara Lynn, about the option to see writing put back in. That's something you would have to speak with a board member about and bring that conversation back up. We've talked with them a couple of times and told them we would not bring it back up to them unless they ask. So I think it's something you'd reach out to your school board member if you are interested in including writing on summative assessments again, outside of 5th and 8th grade. Okay. Yeah, thank you. I see a couple of, we agree with Terry Lynn and making sure writing, or asking for writing to be put back in. And thank you for staying. And once again, I'll just say that is a great thing to reach out to your state school board member and let them know. Okay, I think we've had about 67% of people participate in the poll. We'll leave it open for just another minute and see if anybody else would like to respond. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and I'll share the results. Okay, so you can see that we had 67% of people participate in the poll. We've had 76% say no, we should not assess listening on RISE. 24% say yes. It's similar to what we had from our secondary literacy directors. So we'll see the elementary literacy directors, the numbers from them. And again, if you think about things and have other points you'd like to raise before we bring this to the policy advisors on the 30th, please reach out. My email was a couple slides earlier, Sleeping Carter. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing the poll. And I think we're ready to move on to the next slide. Right, Maureen.
Hi, everybody. I just have a couple of things to share with you today. Our pre-ID files, our first pre-ID file for WIDA and our ACT pre-ID files have all been submitted, and you should see students in WIDA and ACT now. You can make manual adjustments or changes for students in ACT, and if you need to make any student changes in ACT, you are the one in charge of doing that now. If you have any questions about how to make manual rostering changes in ACT now, you can contact Scott or me, and we can help you with that. Also, right now is the time where I will determine eligible schools for National Blue Ribbon Schools. It's a national recognition from the U.S. Department of Education. All schools that participate in RISE are eligible for this award. We just take the top 3 schools. It's based on your math and ELA combined performance on RISE. We choose exemplary high performing schools, which are schools that are in the top 15% of the state based on your proficiency in math and English combined, and then performance of certain subgroups. Once we determine eligible, like the top 3 schools, we contact them and there is an application process. If you have any questions about National Blue Ribbon Schools, you can contact me. There's also a website, the National Blue Ribbon School website, link right there. Please feel free to get in touch if you know any schools that are interested in this, and I will happily get in touch with them. Next slide. That's pretty much all I have for everybody today. Here are just the usual core code list, student rostering manual. Please read them. They're full of great information. And I'm pretty sure that's it for me.
All right. Getting into WIDA. There's our contact information, of course. Please reach out if you have any questions. Again, I still have been getting a lot of questions about screening. So this really is just a reminder, screening happens all year round. Please make sure that you're using the appropriate grade level clusters when you are assessing students for English language services. So when you're screening them, we are past the beginning of the school year. So now it is 10 school days to get students screened. One question we have been getting a lot of is, can teachers just refer students to be screened for language services? And the answer is no. It has to be based on the home language survey. So if you have any questions about that, please contact us. We're happy to talk you through that conversation and the why. We've had a lot of trainings taking place. We had 2 more yesterday. If you missed those trainings yesterday, they were recorded. They were webinars that were recorded. Those will be posted by next Wednesday in the WIDA Secure Portal, so you can access those webinars. We have 1 more training happening that is going to be closing for registration very soon, next week. And so that is scaffolding learning through language. You have to register for the specific section, that's a tongue twister, to do the course. So, or to do that learning. So please be aware of that. That's closing. Just a couple of other reminders. Now that we're getting closer to testing, customer service hours for WIDA will be extended. So please note those times if you're going to be calling or emailing. And then they have WIDA and DRC host webinars. These are just generic, non-state specific webinars that you can go to for free and ask questions. But again, our own Utah specific webinars and trainings, those have already taken place. Again, those will be posted to the secure portal by next Wednesday. All right. Access test dates. Okay, so I tried to really streamline this for everyone. As Maureen said, the first pre-ID upload already took place, okay? You should see those students in WIDA AMS. You cannot do anything with those students though, for now. Starting December 6th, is when, and you can see that WIDA AMS test setup available for registrations. That's when you can start doing things with students and changing things for students. Right now, it's just view only. We also have ordered your materials based on that first pre-ID upload that took place. What does USBE order and what are you supposed to order? So USBE orders all materials, all access materials for kindergarten students, and then online grades 1 through 12. So we automatically do handwriting for the writing domain for grades 1, 2, and 3. So you'll get all those booklets automatically. For grades 4 through 12, that is online writing. So all K access materials and online materials are ordered for you. LEAs have to order alternate access or Braille, okay? Today is the last day to get those ordered in order to get them with your initial shipment. So if you have still not placed that order, today is your last day, okay, to get alternate and Braille. We order everything else, okay? Now, if you miss it and you're like, oh, I didn't get it in, today's over, don't panic. The additional test materials ordering window opens January 3rd. You can order any and all materials at that point that you need. Alternate, Braille, maybe you do need a paper form for a student with no technology experience. You can order that then. So your materials, again, it won't come, it will not come with the initial shipment, but they normally are there to you within a week. So it's just for Braille. So in the chat, it's just for Braille or alternate access. Everything else is ordered for you. So also remember that we are going to be doing a second pre-ID upload that will be on January 5th, right before the window opens. So you do not need to add new students until after then. So hopefully the second pre-ID upload will capture any and all movement with new enrollment, transfers, students that are newly identified as English learners. So you don't have to do any of those, students adding them. And as we get closer, Maureen will give us updates on how that's going. One thing that we do want to let you know is that when the first pre-ID upload took place, somehow something went wrong. There was a glitch in the matrix. I'm not even sure I fully understand it, but somehow all the students got put into screener instead of access initially. DRC is working on removing all those students from screener. So if you're still seeing students in screener for test registrations, please just ignore those. Do not do anything with them. DRC is removing them since it was a mistake. Maureen, do you want to say anything about that or add to that? I'm not seeing her come off mute, so I'm assuming.
Nope, actually, yeah, it was just an error and they should remove it and it shouldn't cause any issues at all going forward.
Yeah, so if you're seeing a bunch of kiddos registered for screeners, just ignore it. DRC is removing those for us, but they should be in for access testing. So the only other heads up to give is just making sure that knowing that test materials will be arriving the 4th or the 5th, and you can get shipment notifications and updates. Those materials do need to be signed for. So please, please, please ask questions. Let us know how we can help you as we embark on access testing right around the corner. All right, and then my last slide in today's email this morning, there was an attachment with a flyer for more information. Utah has been asked, only a couple of states actually have been asked to participate in this pilot. Kindergarten Access is being completely refreshed, and Utah was a state that was selected to have the opportunity to pilot the Kindergarten Access, but this is a really unique pilot. It's not piloting Kindergarten Access with our ELs, it's actually piloting the Kindergarten Access with non-ELs. And this is actually something I've had a lot of people request, like, can we just give this test to our regular students to see how their academic English language usage is? And the answer is always no, it's not, because it's funded by Title III funding. But this is an opportunity to do that with kindergarten students. So we are looking for just one LEA in the state of Utah that will be selected to do this, interested in doing the Kindergarten Access pilot with non-ELs. You can submit if you want to apply to be considered for this. Just do the survey, the recruitment survey. It's linked in this screen, and it's also on the flyer. And then you can see also information on the redesigned Kindergarten Access. So for the LEA that is chosen, I think it's just a handful of schools because they just need a certain population size. There are incentives for this. For the schools that participate, they get money. I believe it's not a lot of money. I want to say it's like $200, but hey, $200 is better than nothing, right? All the information is on the flyer. The State Board of Education, we are not the ones that will ultimately select the LEA that is chosen to do this in Utah. WIDA will, because they know the demographics and the needs and the students that they need to get to pilot it. But I would encourage you all to volunteer to do it, because this is a unique opportunity that Utah has actually never had in the pilot and assessment development process. They need to be able to collect data of non-ELs versus ELs when creating the assessment. So if you have any questions, again, see the attachment or reach out to myself. I think that is all I have. Thank you so much.
All right, for Apple testing, we are well underway. In fact, we're more than halfway completed, but because of that, we know that there are still some schools who haven't finished. So just as a reminder, before administration for the Apple assessment, make sure that teachers are using the systems check to ensure that all devices are working appropriately. When you go through that systems check, you'll want to really note the little green check marks. So you can see my screenshot here with a systems check that my bandwidth, my web browser, and my microphone have all been green lighted to go, but my video and my captions have not yet. And so that's where those are your little hints to start troubleshooting. Okay, if you don't see those little green check marks. Also, just as a friendly reminder, do not skip the demo test with your students. That is the best way to allow students to practice with the construct of the system, with the test itself, so that they know what to expect when they are in the Apple environment. How do we know if Apple will move to a secure browser? I have not been told that that is an option yet. I am happy to take that back to the vendor though. Apple directions tell students not to take a screenshot. I don't believe so, but I can look into that as well. If you want to send me an email regarding possibly what happened, I can help provide a little more clarification or guidance with that. For your URs, as we are seeing URs and NRs come in, just a few things to avoid the UR rating. This is where if a student's issued a UR, a new test code is actually going to be issued automatically overnight so that the student can complete those components again. But some things to be aware of with that: make sure students are actually answering in the target language. That systems check, working to minimize background noise as much as possible. As I have been reviewing some students' assessments when there are questions, it is very evident that many students are testing in the very same room, specifically with the ILS component, the interpersonal language listening and speaking piece. And you can hear audibly on the microphone many students speaking at the same time, which is very hard for raters to determine which student is which. Because as teachers, we have the benefit of knowing our students' voices, what they sound like, what the cadence of their speaking is. And we can listen to those and go, well, I know it's this voice right here. Our raters do not have that capability of knowing those cadences and what student voices sound like. And so it's very hard for them to determine which student's answer they should be tracking when they are hearing multiple voices. So just a couple of things to be cognizant or be aware of with that. When it comes to your rating reviews, if you remember from our training, rating reviews this year are in a more automated way. You can submit those yourselves. Just know that there is a threshold provided for teachers that's basically 10% of the test orders that have been provided under that cactus. I would also recommend that teachers review student submissions before submitting a rating review. We've had a couple of them come in where it was evident that what the student had submitted was not checked by the teacher prior. Okay. Also, just as a heads up, the rating reviews are only available for our human rated components. So that's the ILS and the PW components. Okay. Your rating reviews need to take place in the window. So the later you choose to test, the less time you have to submit those rating reviews. And as a reminder, our window does close December 1st. It does take 10 days, a lot of times, for those rating reviews to be completed. So be aware of that as well. As far as an LEA responsibility with the Apple test, one of the biggest ones to be aware of is just checking the Apple test status for the schools that are in your district. To do that, you'll log into the client site and just scroll all the way to the bottom where you'll see a graph. You can change the type by one level below and then apply that filter. And the schools in your LEA are going to populate by bar graph. And you can see here, I've just included a screenshot of what I am provided at the state level. So you can see mine are done by district, not by school. But this gives you an idea of where you can then look at to communicate with your schools. Do they need to have some additional support? Maybe it's a school that doesn't have many tests completed, or maybe it's a school that has lots of tests completed. So you can reach out and communicate with those schools as needed. Just as a heads up, as far as our overall orders go, we are well more than halfway completed, which is great. There are only approximately 15,000 scheduled tests that have not yet been taken. With that number, though, note that every once in a while, you have a student who might move from one DLI school to another DLI school. When that happens, the student is going to be eligible at both schools to take both of those tests. And they obviously don't need to do that. They only need to take the test at their current school. You don't need to do anything with the tests that are ordered for a student who may no longer be enrolled in your building. They will cancel out, but just know that those numbers do sometimes inflate the scheduled test numbers because it is still sitting there as an ordered test. Okay, so just something to be aware of there. If you have any other questions with Apple, feel free to reach out to me. Just as a friendly reminder for you, I'd mentioned this at our last AD meeting, but I will be on medical leave starting on Monday for at least 3 weeks. And so Kim and Jessica will be taking the bulk of your Apple questions beyond that after Monday. And Teresa gets to do keep and peep.
Okay, go ahead. Just a reminder, reports are available on our website. So I just put links here for our PEEP and KEEP state reports, and it does have our LEA level data as well. So if you just want to look at some comparisons as to how your LEA did to others in the state. Next slide. And then these are just some potential solutions for administering the KEEP assessment. So I know we had talked about that before, just some ideas of some different things that you could possibly do. So I just wanted to provide that information for you. I'm not going to go over that specifically because if you are still planning on administering the KEEP, here's just some ideas that you can refer to at a later point when you are making decisions at your LEA. Next. Then for Acadians, go ahead next. Just a reminder about those middle of year benchmark windows. So they're starting relatively soon, December 1st. And then please make sure you do not benchmark students outside of the window. So I have received a number of emails about that. So if a new student moves in, you can request their records from previous school if you don't have that data, or give a progress monitoring probe, but that benchmark should not be given outside of that window. So that's all I've got. Brittany, yes. So because it is not going to be state reported, it's not the state required assessment, you can determine how you are utilizing the KEEP assessment. So the online platform will still be available for you to use so that you can still access reports online for the KEEP assessment, but it's not required.
Awesome. Thanks, Teresa. Okay, so we are going to talk a little bit about dynamic learning maps. So one thing that we really haven't spent time digging into is really reading score reports. So I wanted to walk you guys through this. So this was added this year to the teacher trainings that I did, and it was very well received. So I thought it was time to kind of present this to you. So on a student score report, individual student score reports, You guys have access to that, and your teachers will have access to individual student score reports once students are rostered to them. And they will actually be able to go in and see any score report that a student has had since 2016 when we really started DLM. So there's a link there and some page numbers on how to get in and access those score reports. What students get on those is they receive an overall results. And then there's a few other components. So I wanted to kind of dig into this overall result, so you have an understanding of how DLM determines these proficiency levels, and how teachers can use these. So the first page of an individual score report is this overall results. So if you'll notice, what you see on this example report here is that there are 4 buckets in which our overall results are in. So we have emerging, approaching the target, at target, and advanced. So how we correlate those buckets is we dump them into the proficiency 1, 2, 3, and 4, just like we do with our RISE assessments and our Utah Aspire Plus. And remember, DLM is included in our accountability measure for achievement. So when teachers are looking at this, right, you get that overall 1, 2, 3, 4. We draw the line at proficiency, right, between 2 and 3. So students have to be at a 3 or 4 to be considered proficient. If you notice up there, I've highlighted in the overall results. So this is an example of a grade 10 mathematics. So the student was in grade 10, took the math test, and they had the opportunity to show mastery over 40 skills. And they were tested on 8 essential elements. So it starts out by saying how many skills could they have possibly been, that they could have possibly tested on and shown mastery, and how many essential elements. Then it goes on to tell the teachers, right, that the student in this example mastered 8 out of 40 skills. So when thinking about proficiency levels, I think teachers out there overarchingly, and as we've presented this to teachers over trainings, a lot of them had the assumption that their students had to be, when we're referring to at target, that was the linkage level. They had to be at target on all of the essential elements for their linkage level, which is not the case. So when we look at this, if we say that the student has shown mastery in 8 out of 40 skills, if you take 8 divided by 40, right, you get 20%. And so most people hopefully would not consider a student to be at mastery with a 20% achievement. So that's the first page they get. So go ahead, Elise. I'm going to skip this one and come back to it. So if you go to the next slide. So where DLM is getting that 40 skills to be assessed is we have 5 different what we call linkage levels, or if you will, those kind of entry points into which a student can have instruction in our essential elements and also be tested. So if you look on, this is typically the 3rd page that comes in on the score report. It produces what is called the learning profile for the student. So here you can see in this example, you have the 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it says target and 5 bucket. This is now where it correlates to those linkage levels. So your teacher should have a pretty robust understanding, hopefully, about that. And so when we look at this learning profile, this is going to show us the essential elements that our student was actually assessed on. And then if you look at the color coding in the learning profile, green means that the student showed mastery at that linkage level. So if trying to figure out where DLM got that 40 skills for our grade 10, knowing that we have 5 linkage levels, our student was assessed on 8 essential elements times 5 linkage levels, equals 40. So that's where they're getting that skill set, right? There were 40 skills in which a student could be assessed. So the way they do this is, for example, on this one here, and this one is an ELA example, but this learning profile here, if you look at the ELA.C2.1, you'll see that the student has 2 blocks filled in. So this means that our student showed mastery right up to the distal precursor level. So the way this works is our student here may have never actually seen an initial precursor testlet. Maybe they saw an initial precursor testlet. Maybe they saw distal and proximal too. So that's part of that algorithm and that adaptive piece that runs within the testlets. But based upon that information, it says that the student mastered at that distal precursor skill set. So how they do this is because my student mastered under this distal precursor, it's automatically assumed that they have that mastery in the initial precursor. So if you go through and you look at a learning profile, a student does not have to show mastery all the way up at that target level for every single essential element. If they show mastery at a target level, they get points, right, for having mastery for all of the linkage levels behind that. So the next thing that comes into play is getting you guys cut scores. How do they determine those cut scores? So if you go to the next one. So I have produced for you where those cut scores fall. So for English language arts, and depending on the grade level and how many essential elements they see, you'll see the total linkage levels vary. So here's where we get our buckets of our 1, 2, 3, and 4. But for example, here, if we take our third grader, and in order for them to be considered proficient at that target level, they have to master 31 out of a possible 50 skills. And if you take 31 divided by 50, I believe it comes out to around 60%. So really, our students can be considered at target proficient around a 60% mastery of the skill sets. So hopefully this is a little bit more helpful to you and your teachers in determining like how this works. And if you, I gave you cut scores for the math and science as well in here. And so you'll see those. And so teachers can look at that and based upon their, you know, how many skills their student mastered, like how close were they from bouncing from that 1 to, you know, 3 or 4 bucket. If you go back up, Elise, right there. So I do want to talk about this one, but first, are there any questions kind of around how those score reports work and how we consider, how they get those proficiency buckets? I don't see much of anything. I'm hoping this was helpful. It's kind of a lot to take in. But the second part of the score report that teachers get is the score report area. So it takes and breaks down all of the, if you will, sort of domains in which the student showed mastery and where they were tested. So if you look here, so where this becomes really important for teachers and thinking about how we drive instruction based upon this, one, they get that learning profile so they can see exactly which skills a student has mastered that can go into a student's PLAFUP, right, when writing an IEP and help determining next steps. However, if you think about this, right, so for example, we had our 10th grader, right? So our score report, our student is no longer in 10th grade. So it's aligned to our 10th grade essential elements. And now our students in 11th grade. So how can we use this to help drive 11th grade instruction? That's where this part of the score report becomes really beneficial. Where should we target maybe IEP goals in that really intensive intervention around what we do there? All grade levels will have essential elements that fall within these domains, and they are listed in the blueprints. And I walked teachers through this year. But if you see for this example on my 10th grader, you can see where under the understand and use measurement principles and units of measure, that domain, my student showed mastery in 0 of those skills. But we showed a little bit of mastery in some of these other areas. So what I may want to consider doing is for 11th grade, I may want to consider focusing IEP goals for 11th grade that fall within that, that domain. So that's one way teachers can use this part to kind of help drive that component. Okay, so that was really what I wanted to walk you guys through. A reminder, so here's your DLM Padlets. You have these slides, obviously, but I also included these slides on the DLM Administration for Teachers PowerPoint. So you have access to that there, and your teachers have access to. And on the DLM Padlets, there should be, you'll see a column really around score reporting. And for teachers, there's a TA document there on how to talk to parents about score reports too. So there's some additional valuable information on the Padlets that can help teachers really in using this. Okay, another reminder. So we held the district coordinator training October, I think it was 20th, somewhere around there. That recording has now been posted. So you can find that on the district coordinator resource Padlet. It's there, it's available. And so those of you that were not able to attend that, it's there for you, as well as the PowerPoint that was used. So you can refer back to that. Okay, so we'll pause here. Do testing directors have any action items regarding the 1% threshold information? Hal, here we go. Is this just an information item? So this is a really important topic. So just so you are aware, at about 1 o'clock today, I'm going to turn around and present all of this exact same information to your special education directors. So I want you to be aware of this because I am directing them to come to you for data information. So those of you that have been around for a while, you know that we, when ESSA was reauthorized, go ahead to the next slide, Elise. When ESSA was reauthorized, the federal regulations changed what we call this 1% threshold. So if you're curious as to why we call alternate assessment participants 1%, kind of in that quote unquote, it really kind of comes out of this regulation. So previously, this regulation stated that a state could not have more than 1% of their student population be proficient in an alternate assessment. What they found over time was that the number of students we had participating in our alternate assessments was increasing up to somewhere. So we had some states across the state or across the nation that were at like 2, 3, and 4%. So they changed this regulation, and it is now that a state cannot exceed 1% of our total number of students, our student population, participating in alternate assessments. With that came all kinds of other requirements that we are required to do to ensure oversight. If you want to go ahead and go to the next slide, ensure oversight with our LEAs. If an LEA has assessed over 1%, we are required to get a justification letter from you as to why you assessed more than 1% of your students. And then we also are required to do regular monitoring and evaluating of each LEA. So we have been doing this for a couple years now, and 1% letters, I am in the process of drafting those and pulling data as we speak. So those will hopefully be hitting your special ed directors throughout today and hopefully before Thanksgiving break. But why this is so important and why I'm really hitting this hard right now is if we as a state test over 1% of our students on alternate assessments, we are required to submit a waiver back to the federal government. And we're going to get into why that becomes a problem for us. So you can see here's our historical data. So our first red line on our data set, 16-17 was kind of like, that was the year ESSA was came out and gave states opportunities to kind of create plans around this. So you can see in 16-17, we were just above that 1% mark. We decided to go ahead and just start implementing and doing monitoring. And I think because of what we were doing, The first year that the federal government took baseline was in 17-18, and you can see that we dropped below that 1% mark, and we have been below 1% since then. So we have not been on their radar. We have not received any letters, and we have not been required to submit a waiver and follow all of those things. However, here is where I'm getting very, very nervous. If you look at our 1% from last year, we are getting super close to that with that 1% mark. There was a big article that just came out, and the federal government just issued 15 letters to states across the nation requiring them to come within this regulation and be below 1%. So one of the changes also that you need to be aware of is in previous years, we did not submit 9th grade data to the federal government. We had always submitted just zeros within our 9th grade. We made a cognizant decision this year that we are going to start submitting 9th grade. So this year, those 9th grade student counts will go into that calculation. You'll see that by adding grade 9 in ELA, it did not change our percentage. It actually dropped us ever so slightly in math and science by adding grade 9. So that's one of the big changes that you'll want to take into account, that we are submitting grades 3 through 10 data. And when we take this calculation, we're looking at all of those grades together in the different subjects. How this calculation works is your denominator is going to be grades 3 through 10, all of your students that participated in assessment. So that would be your general ed and alternate. And then your numerator becomes just those that participated in alternate. So really it's of all of our students that took a test, how many of them participated in the alternate assessment. That's how we produce that calculation. Okay, go ahead, next slide. Okay, why I have concerns about this and why this is so important that we really need to start taking a little bit more action at the LEA level around this is in order for us to, I think that's the next slide. So this shows you your LEA data. So we've got, I broke down across the different kind of percentage thresholds here. We had 8 LEAs that were over 2%, and we had 30 in ELA and math and 34 in science that were over 1%, but below 2%. So you will see that there is, I think that's what, 42, someone help me with my math, 42 letters that will be going out. Those of you that are sitting in that 0.99 to 0.80, I really am going to need special ed directors to kind of start looking at what's going on there. You guys are getting really close to that tipping point. Go ahead, next slide. So I am asking your special ed directors to contact you to help produce your own calculation to figure out where you guys are at and if you fall in that those different buckets there. Part of the reason why this is so important is, let's say we test over 1% as a state level. We cannot submit a waiver actually to the federal government, because part of what goes into being able to submit a waiver and having the Department of Ed actually consider our waiver and not have consequences for it is we have to assess at least 95% of our entire student population, as well as 95% of our students with disabilities, in order to even submit a waiver. So where this becomes really concerning is if you look, I haven't pulled the 23 data, but this was 2 years ago. We have not met as a state the 95% participation for students with disabilities. So we cannot even be in the running to submit a waiver for the feds. So if you go to the next slide. So what has happened is over time, they have really started putting out the consequences. So where the consequences fall in line for a state, and whenever we have consequences and we have action plans, right, that trickles down and it falls down on LEAs, because then we have to, move those consequences into you. Because this is a regulation that sits within ESSA, it is actually Title I funding that becomes encumbered. So again, let me say that it's Title I funding that becomes at jeopardy underneath this. So the consequences are laid out as such. So if we were to have assessed over 1%, we did not send in a waiver, but we were eligible for a waiver, meaning we met that 95% participation, we would get a letter, we would have to submit a plan, right? And we go into that first year, I guess, if you will, non-compliance. Okay. If we keep going, the next one becomes if you were over 1% and you did not submit a waiver and you were not eligible to submit a waiver, which would be us, right? They will automatically on our Title I grant award put in conditions requiring us to come into compliance. Okay. So with this, that means we would be submitting a plan. We would have to talk to them about the actions we're doing and all the things to help us become compliant as a state. Next slide. Our second year, if we were to go into a second year of still being over 1%, what happens is we would then move our Title I grant funding would move into a high risk status. Okay. So at this point, OSEP and the Department of Ed would most likely start intervening. I can tell you from colleagues in other states that have been in this bucket, it is not fun. They have meetings with the Department of Ed. They may come out and do some monitoring. The risk that we run is they start putting us in a place where they may be directing USBE and how to use those Title I funds. The next one becomes, if you hit that third year and you're not within compliance of the 1% in that third year, they start withholding funding from the state in Title I. So we do not want to find ourselves in this space. And I am getting very nervous because we're encroaching on that 1% cap. And I will tell you right now, I do not want to have to deal with the feds. So what we are asking special ed directors, and again, this is going to them this afternoon. So go ahead, next slide, please. So I'm going to skip through these. So this is the justification process. Letters are going out. Anyone identified over 1% is required to submit a justification letter back to me by January 5th. We will review those on January 8th, and we will choose LEAs that will receive monitoring, and we choose 50% of those LEAs. Just so you're aware, what happens is the LEAs will have 4 weeks to upload student files. We go in and we choose certain students taking alternate assessment. We do a file review of eligibility and the IEP. We look for non-compliance, and then your special ed directors will have corrective action and written findings if there is non-compliance.
Tracy,
But hold on, Hal. I know I see your question. Just one sec.
I don't know when you say ELA, is that the special ed director or is that the assessment director? What's ELA? What does LEA mean?
LEA is Local Education Agency.
No, but who's the owner of that?
It's going to be your special ed department.
Thank you.
Yep. Sorry. So what we're asking your special ed department to do is one, where you guys come in is the data piece, right? You guys are the ones that have access to assessment data. They're going to be asking you, and especially if you're required, your LEA. So really it sits on the special ed director, but it is your district is required to submit a justification, right? You have to help them do projections, right? Where do they think they're going to fall within the 1%? But we want to be checking that. We're going to ask them to start thinking about where their trading sits and how they're implementing the alternate assessment guidelines and what internal monitoring processes they have in place. So those are the things that we're asking them to do. If we end up tipping that 1% scale, most likely what's going to happen is we're going to have to increase our monitoring efforts, meaning we may have to start monitoring you guys that are maybe even under that 1%. So kind of back to that, if you go to the graph that had the LEAs that were 0.99 to 8.0, some of those LEAs may start getting monitoring too, which I don't want to do. I don't want to have any more reach, right, than we need to. So that's where we land with that. One thing to be clear about is where this gets tricky is I cannot come to you and say you cannot be over 1%, right? So at the end of the day, we have IEP team decisions, my job is to ensure that the students in your LEA, right, that are taking the alternate assessment qualify. So that's really where that insurance is. If you have the appropriate students and you're over 1%, then that's fine. We move about life. But we just really need to start taking a more cognizant look at what's going on with that data. And so then Hal, you need more training on what you're supposed to do. Can USBE do these calculations? You have all of our data, thanks. Okay, so you technically, Hal, should have all of your data. I am pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong here, in Tableau, you guys get all of your assessment data reported back to you. So we publicly report which LEAs were over 1% and which ones weren't, but it's a yes or no. And the reason being is because we cannot publicly put on our website, right, any data that falls within certain thresholds to identify students. And we're already dealing with a small number of population. So it was determined that we just report yes or no. And so I will be giving a spreadsheet. It has not been updated yet on the website. I just received that. So your special ed directors have that spreadsheet in their special ed folders today. So I will remind them and point them towards that. So they will know this afternoon whether or not they're an LEA that's going to anticipate getting a justification notification. And that's what we do. It is really cumbersome. Those that assess over 1%, Hal, I give you guys LEA, school level, and student level data. Trying to do that for all, what do we have? 140, 120, I don't know how many LEAs we have now, including charter schools. That's a lot of information. So you should be able to have access to your data in Tableau. Yes, David Mackey would be the one, Aaron's team would be the one to reach out. And if we need to look at putting a training together on how to access that, please let us know. But you should have that. Can share your data for each LEA regarding their 1%. So I don't know if that helps answer your question, Brad, and your question, Hal. If you don't have access to Tableau, you're a new assessment director, you definitely need to get a hold of Aaron Bruff. And I would say email me and I can forward you on to Aaron and get David in so we can get you guys set up. We need to be able to add LEA accounts in Tableau. Okay, I know that Kim, correct me if I'm wrong, Elise and Sid, I think Kim, we did like a really quick Tableau training not too long ago. But will you ladies help remind me that we probably need to come back and do something different to support these guys?
Yeah, I think Aaron came a couple of months ago, maybe September, to the AD meeting and did a quick Tableau training, but sounds like there could be an additional one.
Yeah. So, because the other thing that's happening is we're getting ready to roll into our special ed APR annual performance report. So your special ed directors are also going to be coming to you around assessment data for their indicators as well. So, okay, we'll take note of that. So, Okay, that's what we have for right now. So I know it's not great news, and I know a lot of it does not sit on your shoulders, but I want you guys to be aware of the seriousness, of the situation, and that what your ask is to help with them is the data component. And if you are not that data person, please help your special ed directors figure out who is the correct one to help get to data. And I guess I'll just jump in and do this really quickly. So this is just a reminder, Jessica and I have been trying to hold some accommodations and accessibility virtual office hours for you guys, for any district staff, for teachers to just kind of pop in, ask any questions that they have around accommodations. We can help answer accommodations instructionally for IEP teams, as well as assessments, whatever the needs are. This is not geared towards special ed or gen ed specifically. Anybody and everybody's invited. So we will be doing our next 2 office hours. There's no registering for this. Here's the Zoom link here. Copy and paste this, email it out to everybody. November 29th and November 30th is when we're doing our next 2 that anybody can pop in and ask questions or get help or dig deeper into something if they want. So please pass that along. Okay, that is all I have. Thank you for your time today.
Just really quickly, I have one slide for RISE just regarding mid-year summatives. The window is open. It opened at the beginning of November. It will continue through December 22nd and then close for that holiday moratorium, reopening again January 2nd, and then closing March 1st. As a reminder, any interim that has or mid-year summative test that was started prior to March 1st has to be completed by close of business on March 1st. So keep that in mind with any students who are working on interim assessments or mid-year summative assessments. With those mid-year summative assessments, I know that with some of your calendaring, many of your semesters are ending prior to your winter holiday break. And if that is the case, when the course instruction ends in December, the test needs to be completed prior to that semester change. So make sure that you are planning accordingly there. And then just as a reminder, the benchmark modules that are available within the RISE portal are still available for teachers to use throughout the testing window. Just a couple of quick things for Utah Aspire Plus. We will be transitioning from the Pearson Access Next system to the Adams system, still with Pearson. It will be available in January. The testing window is March 4th through May 10th. When it comes to remote administration, as a reminder, just like with RISE, it is available for online instruction only students. And this gets a little more cumbersome and a little more, we have to pay more attention to it with our secondary students, because we have many students who are enrolled in multiple schools, some of which are online schools and some of which are brick and mortar schools. And even a driver's education course is going to require a student to test in person. Hal Adam is just a different testing platform. I believe it's like assessment delivery something module. It is still with Pearson. It's just not Pearson Access Next. So it's just another Pearson system for test delivery. Does that help answer the question? Big change. It will be a bigger change on the delivery side, but not on the student side, because students are still taking the test through TestNav. Nothing looks different on the student side. Things will look different on your side, but will be, from what we have experienced so far, less cumbersome in the administration, as sessions will be easier to set up and add students to. So those types of things. The concerns that we have had with Utah Aspire Plus administration are going to help. Some of them will be alleviated with the switch to the Adams system, if that helps provide some clarification. Kendra, as far as the core standards, I am not entirely sure yet. With that, also just remember the purpose of the Utah Aspire Plus test is to provide a predictive ACT score and then grade level growth between 9th and 10th grade. Okay. Online school, yes, as an online school, you can still test students remotely, Delray, as long as they are not enrolled in even one course in a brick and mortar school. Okay. Will the Adams system allow interim tests, or will that remain in UTIPS? Kim, for right now, the high school benchmarks are remaining in UTIPS, but further choices might be made later. At the moment, they will remain in UTIPS for the foreseeable future, though. As a reminder for students who are going to need to complete paper forms for Utah Aspire Plus, those will need to be completed in person, not in a remote setting. Just as a calendaring piece for you, we have set an ADAM training for that Utah Aspire Plus administration for January 31st, 2024. I do have a Midas course for you that I will include in the AD memo for next week so that you can register for that. Any other questions regarding Utah Aspire Plus, you can drop them in the chat and I will respond there. With that, Scott can go on to ACT.
Ellie,
ACT.
I apologize. Is that training in January designed for district level or for test coordinator or administrators at each school level?
It is going to be more LEA level driven, but you are welcome to share it with your testing coordinators at buildings.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, ACT updates. First thing is some training coming up, and there's a typo on this page. I was looking at this page going, that doesn't look right. The training is actually on January 17th, not the 14th. Sorry about the typo. It's an in-person training at the Graduate School District. We got the information there. That information has also been updated on the ACT schedule of events. And so that's in person, but if you can't make it in person, it can also be virtual. We have another virtual training February 15th, and that the links for both of those are at the Zoom, and that link is embedded in there. And so we've got those in there. Next slide. We've got if you missed the ACT Now training that we had beginning of last week, I think, yeah, beginning of last week, that training is online. Emily got that online real quick. I logged in the next morning and there was an email from her saying that she got that recording done. And so there's the link there for that ACT Now training. If you need a refresher, if you want to check it out, great, it's there. Go ahead and hit it. And then another thing on permissions and ACT Now, the state testing coordinator, that's unfortunately me probably. I'm not as computer literate as I'd like to be. Like just today, I didn't realize I didn't know the difference between .com and .org. That was my fun one for the day. I felt like such a nuts. I was crazy. But we assigned, based on the information you sent us in the original org file, we assigned the district test coordinators. You assign those school permissions within the LEA. If you decide, I don't want to be the only district test coordinator, that's fine. Assign that person as a school test coordinator and just drop me an email and I can go in and add that additional permission to them. And so we can actually take care of that pretty quickly once you've assigned that person. I get occasionally emails from people at the school and they want me to assign them. I'm like, well, I can't unless your district assessment director or test coordinator tells me that that's okay. And so it's easier if you just assign them, drop me an email, say, please change this so they can have district controls, and that's great. Piece of feedback on the training, not a way to toggle from TCM back to ACT Now. We'll take that to them and check it out. That sounds like an important toggle. I think I would like to have that toggle too myself. So I'll definitely take that back to ACT. And there's a new version of TestNav, just like with Utah Aspire Plus. We also use TestNav on ACT. That's in the next slide if we could advance it. This version is required. You will get an error message if you don't have it, and it could cause a testing irregularity, and we don't like those. And so make sure that when you load up for your students to take the test, remember this is the student software, that the computers the students are using all have this version of TestNav, and there's a link there on where to get that download. And they've also got other information on what your requirements are and to make sure that your software and hardware are compatible with that. Going forward, if you've started looking at your schools and your students, you'll see that they automatically defaulted to being online tested, with about 75% of our schools last year testing online. It just seemed to make more sense to make it so that there are fewer changes that way. Having to go from paper to online would have made a lot more work for pretty much everybody. Some things that, if you haven't truly cemented this as a decision to go online, some things that could come in handy in terms of making an argument, maybe, especially if you're not the one that's making that decision. We see fewer errors made by test administrators when it's online, especially things like giving the wrong test booklet to the wrong person, which means we have fewer misadministrations and fewer no-score results, a much lower percentage of those that occur with online testing. Remember, you get more flexibility. There's more test windows. I mean, there's a lot more different windows for testing and makeups. And now with the new ACT Now system, you do not need to request that change through ACT or through us here at USBE. You just go in and change that individual student over and change their actual testing date to a different window or a different day, and it's not a problem. You can do that all on your own. There's no shipping, receiving, distribution, collection, or secure storing of materials. Don't have to worry about that because it's all managed by ACT on the system. There are right now, because we're making this change, there's going to be shorter, should be, according to ACT, shorter on-hold waiting times at the ACT help desk. One of the things I really appreciated when I started here at USBE is there's always been an emphasis of we do what's good for students. If it's not good for students, we've always been told to sing out, to let people know that this isn't good for students. This is something we want to do. And for ACT being online, this is really good for your students. There are fewer errors made by students. Since this is the only paper test left, and none of these kids have really ever taken a paper test like this, they don't bubble well. And what that means is you have students that are probably giving a right answer, but because they didn't bubble it properly, they're getting it marked wrong, which means their score isn't as high as it could be. And it doesn't go the other way, right? You don't bubble badly and then get a right answer magically. It's just that the scores are technically lower because they're not bubbling well. It's an online experience they're familiar with. TestNav is something they use for 9th and 10th grade only already, so it shouldn't be a problem with that. And all the retakes on the national ACT are also online, which means if your students do a retake, remember 24% of our graduating cohorts took retakes, then they're going to be, if they did it online, that's going to be a seamless experience for them when they take it online and they're on their retake, and there's not going to be any confusion that happens with that. And so we're just continually promote go online now, remembering that next year, you're not going to get a choice anyway. It's all going to be online, except for kids that have accommodations. And so that's all I've got. If there's no other questions for me, I'm going to turn the time over to Jessica.
Okay, just a reminder, the ACT does have the hard deadline for accommodations. So if you're new this year, just ensure that you are communicating with your special education folks in your LEA, or whoever is coordinating your 504 plan and those from your multilingual learners to ensure that you are requesting ACT accommodations by that January 19th deadline. I strongly recommend getting those in by December, just because if there's anything that ACT has clarifications on, is requesting you submit anything else, it kind of gives you some time to resubmit that. There's all the information you need on that. Next, Elise. And just make certain that you have the consent to release information to ACT prior to sharing a student's IEP or 504 English learner information with them. You don't have to turn that into ACT. Just keep that on file. It doesn't have to actually be physically signed by a parent or a guardian. As long as you have verbal confirmation, that suffices. Next. You can go on to the next page. And then also a reminder that the College Board also has a deadline of January 18th, and they also require a consent form. If you have any questions about accommodations for AP exams, you can reach out to myself, or the next page, contact Kirsty Schreck at USBE. She is the AP specialist.
Right, I think we have come to the end of our slides, but we did have one additional topic that we wanted to come up to discuss with TSI schools. I think Michelle wanted to discuss something with the TSI schools.
Correct. Thank you, Sydney. As many of you know, we have we initially had a publication date for TSI designations for November 6th. We've been really looking at that data carefully to make sure that it is correct. And I know that many of you are asking for it. Just to share out with this full group, we are going to have those posted to the assessment accountability website under accountability resources by the end of day tomorrow, barring any unforeseen problems with the website. We don't expect that to happen, but we are trying to get these out to you as soon as possible. And a few of you who have sent direct inquiries to me, I will send you an update as soon as those are available. That's all. Thank you. Unless there are questions.
All right, thank you, Michelle, and thank you all for attending today. Looks like we got through everything pretty quickly. If there are any other discussion topics or things you want to discuss with the group as a whole or with USBE, please let us know. And otherwise, we'll give you about an hour and a half back to your day. Thank you all for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Really quickly, if anyone still is on, there is a question from Andrew that does the calculation include or exclude opt-outs? So nope, it's just those that took a test. So that could be part of the reasoning why you guys as an LEA, if you have high opt-out in your regular ed assessments, that could tip you over the 1%. And we have tried to go to the federal government and ask and plead and beg about, we are an opt-out state and they do not care. So we've got to hit that 95% threshold. But if that is the case and you do find that is what is tipping over, definitely look at how you can strategically do something with that maybe. But yeah, good question, Andrew.
And Michelle, Brad asked if we could share the USBE link where the CSI stuff will be posted. And then Scott or Jessica, do we see the question about accommodations, TAAACT.org to apply? Is that the correct website?
Yes, it's still the test. Yes, TAA.
Yeah, if you're getting that your error code for ACT now, the first thing I do is make sure you've confirmed your schools. A lot of times we have the district confirmed, but the school's not confirmed, and so that's not valid. Your org code could also be wrong. You have to have the proper organization code that the schools answer to, which should be your district code. And if that's not working, I'd give ACT a call on their helpline, because we have had a couple of those where it pops up. And it's created an issue. And so I'm going to pop that really quick into the chat just so you can get it without having to look it up. But give them a call too, because there might be something they've got toggled that might need to fix it. And if they're not giving you any satisfaction, just drop me and Maureen a letter, and because we can bring in people above their pay grade who can help move things along. But we've had that happen a couple of times, and usually it's because your org code for the schools is not the proper one to the district. And if Maureen has any more information, I'm sure she knows too. She knows better than I do. She's really good.
All right. Thank you all. I don't see anything else in the chat. But as always, if there's anything that comes up, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. I'm sure there are other people that have similar questions. So please send us questions if you have them. And if not, we'll see you next month. Thank you all.